welcome to the Multifamily and More Expert Series. This is a series where we dive deep on a particular topic with an expert. And today's expert is none other than Mr. Reed Starkey. Reed is an investor out here in Michigan, where I live as well. He also runs Starkey Multifamily, a meetup group in the local area, and does a lot of cool stuff with that. And he's going to talk to us today about value add and adding value and all of that. But before we do that, Reed, introduce yourself to the folks. What should people know about you?
Yeah, like you said, Reed Starkey, and I've been investing since 2015, mostly in single family and working into the multifamily now. And I host a meetup the first Thursday of every month, Starkey Multifamily. You can check it out on Facebook, and then we have a group page as well, and should be enough to get you started.
Yeah, where do you meet up, just so people know?
It's Monroe Bar and Grill in Monroe, Michigan.
Monroe, Michigan. Perfect. Excellent. Yeah, and you are, at this point, a full-time investor, correct?
Yes. Beautiful.
You're living the dream then for a lot of us. I'm not there yet. My aspiration is to be like you one day. So all right, so let's talk about this. So we're going to get into really underwriting a deal and how to determine value and that sort of thing. So, the basis of value for most people starts with cap rates, right? We always start there. And for those that aren't familiar, cap rate is essentially the rate of return you would expect if you bought a property cash, right? If there's no debt on it. So if you hear of, it's got a 10 cap, a 10% capitalization rate, it means that is the expected rate of return, 10% return if you were to pay cash for the property. That's the return on your money that you would get for that property. And that cap rate determines the value. So using that 10. You still there?
I'm back. Yeah, or you're back.
I chopped up on you. I'm sorry. We'll get that all cut out. But so that's the general theme of what a cap rate is. So Reed, talk to me about how that impacts things. So you're looking for value add property as a syndicator. What does that mean, and how do you determine value?
Well, yeah. So I think the biggest misconception of people I talk to is, when they talk about cap rate and they expect the value to be exactly at that cap rate. Unfortunately, with value add, we're paying for that value add has a value to it, and we have to figure out what that is. So, if we're using a 10 cap, which may be a little aggressive in the area, but it's easy for math. If it's making 100,000 a year, they would just look right at it and say, okay, net operating income's 100,000, so I'll offer $1 million. But that may not be the case. If it's 50% occupied, those 50, the half of the units aren't worth zero. So they have value. So we have to determine what that is. And the best way to think about that is if we look at the flip side, if a property was making zero or losing money, they're not going to pay you to take it. So we have to determine a value for that. And that's where, in my opinion, the cap rates really become kind of worthless when you're evaluating a property that has value add, because it doesn't really play into effect as much as the return on investment for your money. And so again, maybe getting into your question, where does the value add come from?
Yeah.
So a lot of it, the most common would be deferred maintenance. So you've got somebody who's run a place and they really haven't done anything to it in many years. They just kind of ran it and took the money and left it alone. So as that goes, as the property becomes more and more degraded, then less quality tenants will come in. They have to lower the rent, and it's just kind of a downward cycle. So come in with new capital, you can spruce it up, and make it welcome to the better quality tenants that you want, who are going to pay closer to market rent, maybe even a little above. So then it's that delta of raising that rent up from where it's at to, market rent, so where you can get to. Rents can also be under because the owner doesn't want to raise them. That's sometimes they're afraid that the tenant's going to leave, or they just would prefer to keep a tenant in there, maybe $100 or more, under market rent. So that's a fairly easy one. The investor's dream defined.
Yeah. But let's real quick before you go. So you mentioned something I want to dive into a little bit. Kind of pricing that upside into your offer. So like you said, you look at a property that's got 100K NOI and you just say it's a 10 cap, $1 million, that's my offer. So I'm clear. You're saying, hey, look, 50% occupancy in that example, you got, if it's a 100-unit property, 50 units that have value that are not returning any value in that NOI currently, right? So that 100K is assuming that there's 50 vacant units. How do you, or do you, I think you do, how do you determine how to price in some of that upside so that you can get your offer accepted, or do you at all? Yeah, so I'll leave it there. How do you sort of calculate in those other 50, and how do you get between, like, I want that upside when I purchase it, so I want to buy on exactly what the NOI is, but at the same time, in order to be realistic and purchase the property, I got to buy some of that upside, I think is what you're saying. How do you do that?
Yeah, because they're not going to give it to you for free.
Right.
And if they did, there's somebody that will always overpay you. So, I guess there's somebody who's willing to pay something for that value. So if they can add $1 million of value to the property, they might pay $300,000-400,000 for it. So they're going to pay for that upside. What I personally do, and I use underwriting software. There's tons of Excel sheets out there you can buy online. And I use one that I like, and I plug in numbers of where it is currently today, and then I schedule it out. How am I going to get it to where it needs to be? So in the case where we were going to raise the rent, maybe, or I guess going back to the 50%, if we're going to add up to 95% occupancy, I take in all that extra value, recalculate the expenses, recalculate the income, and then determine, and it's not going to happen day one. It's going to happen maybe over the next 2-3 years, depending on what condition we're working with. And then over the term of the hold, depending on how you want to run it, some people like to do 5-year holds, 8-year holds. That's up to you. But then what type of return on investment do I need to have for my investors? Mm-hmm. So as a syndicator, I don't have all the money in my bank account to make it happen. So I go to other people, use their money, and then they kind of determine what I have to structure the deal as. So if they want maybe a 10% cash on cash return, or, are they looking for, a specific number, then I have to model the deal on my best expectations of how long it will take to get to where, the performance I want, and then what the overall performance of that hold is. And that's how I added that in. And then it just kind of.
That's great. So you're modeling the deal based on your investors' criteria, right? So there's no like, well, I'll give 20% of the upside in my underwriting analysis. It's nothing like that. It's okay. How long is it going to take for me to achieve whatever return I'm offering to investors, or that my investors have agreed or have requested to get out of this deal? That's how you determine what of that upside you're willing to pay for up front. Is that fair?
Yeah.
That's great.
And the best part about that is it's non-subjective. So, if I know that my investors need a certain return and I do the deal, then I know where my number is. And, I don't get any emotion tied up into that offer. If they say, hey, you got to come in higher than that, I know where my line in the sand is, and there's no emotion to it, because it's easy to get tied up into a deal. When you spend hours analyzing it, and many, many, many hours going to the property and researching to people about it, and due diligence phase, you can get really emotional into a property very quickly.
No doubt. So let's talk about real quick the analysis piece. So I think you're a big advocate of software, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I don't. You would have to be much smarter than I would be to do it yourself. With pen and paper. I mean, it would just take a ton of time. Maybe even if you're smart enough to do it, I think it would just take a ton of time. And there's software out there for $100-200. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, agreed. I think we both have used the Michael Blanc sheet. There's the David Tupin sheet. There's a bunch of different things out there, like you said, that Jake and Gino have a product, I know. So there's a bunch of stuff out there that you can get that's really good. I'm like you. I can give a general thought to the total of expenses based on the current NOI. Like anyone can do that. Like, all right, well, let's go 45-50% on expenses. But if that's all you're doing, if you're just doing like a general, like, how does this deal work if I just lop it at 50% of the NOI for expenses? Yeah, we got problems. So you definitely need to get software. I'm with you on that. I'm a big advocate for that. How are you determining the upside on rents? Like what tools are you using? What is when you're underwriting a deal, how are you analyzing a market for rents?
So there's several ways. So in the beginning stages, when I'm just putting together an offer, I'll kind of look at apartments.com. I'll look at Renometer, kind of trying to get a feel of the area. What are apartments around it renting for, looking at pictures of it, and kind of getting a feel that way, comparing size and upgrades to what the one I'm looking at has. And that'll give me a good idea for just to make an offer. Once we get into due diligence, I will go a step further, talk to property managers, and it's a two-step. I'm actually interviewing for the actual property manager, but I'm talking to them and saying, hey, you've got properties in the area. Tell me what you think this property would rent, and how would you be able to get the property up? How much would you spend in CapEx, and get all that stuff from them. Somebody who's actually done it in that area, who has properties that they can say, look, here's how I'm performing just down the road. I know I can get you to that much per rent.
That makes sense. And I think for that too, what people might want to think about is, get your general rent range. And then I do this anyway. I would compare the square footage at a minimum. I mean, there's asset classes, B, C, all that stuff, but getting an idea of what you think a reasonable range per square foot of rent is it $1 a square foot? Is it 90 cents a square foot? Something like that, versus just, oh, well, that's 800. So mine's 800, right? Because that could be a 1,200 square foot apartment. That's a B grade property or B class property, where yours is C class 800 square feet. You want to have an idea of that before you just say, hey, rent is 800, so mine's 800 kind of thing. That's my thought. But how about expenses? So you do, I think, some pretty diligent work from what I know of you on expenses. Talking about how you determine, let's start with a big one, taxes. Because I think people look at the taxes that people report at the point of sale and fail to realize that tax amount is going to go up. So you have to do some level of tax analysis. What is your way of doing that? How do you do that?
So so first I get the assessed value, which I do from the MLS.
Okay.
I imagine there's resources out there that you could find online. Unfortunately, I don't know them because I have simple access to the multiple listing service. So I'll get the assessed value, and in Michigan, they have a great website. I don't have the address. I'll give it to you if you want to put it in the show notes. But
sure. Yep.
If you type in like Michigan property tax estimator, it should come up. It's by the state of Michigan. You type in the county, the school district, and the assessed value, and it'll give you a dollar amount that you'll pay. So a lot of people, this may be, I don't know if this is too simple or not, but a lot of people I've seen don't understand how the property tax is going to be evaluated afterwards.
Yeah.
And in theory, I've heard of it not following this rule from a couple of investor friends, but for the most case, you have your assessed value, and the owner is capped at how much his value or his taxable value will go up. So his taxable value is not going to be what you pay. And that's important. So if you're looking at his NOI, his taxes could be way less than yours. So then you're going to look at the estimator, and different states have them. Some are harder to find than others. Michigan happens to be really easy. Mm-hmm. But you're going to look at the current assessed value, and then what your taxes would be, obviously for non-homestead, and then go that way. So that's how I put that in there.
It's important, and I have the website here. You sent it to me earlier, so I'll put it in the comments on this episode. So it's a great way of doing it. It's a great tip, because you do need to figure out, once it's uncapped at sale, like, what are my taxes going to do? How much of a chunk is that going to be that I have to account for in my underwriting? And can I absorb it at the current price that I think I want to offer on this property? So what about some other expenses that aren't as clear, like your vacancy rates, your maintenance and repair expenses, that sort of thing? How do you underwrite that? What tips or tricks do you have there?
Yeah, we could spend an hour or more on that. So a big one is insurance. I think so. Insurance is subjective to many things. So you can have coverage that doesn't cover what you want it to cover, and the prior owner may not have the right coverage that you would get. So it's important to talk to a good insurance carrier and find out, what that's going to be. Also talk to your lender and see what requirements for insurance they are going to have, because they'll have their own requirements, and that could significantly change things. There's so many different individual expenses to really dig into. But I think maybe a quick down and dirty when you're talking to the property managers is to get the average expense per unit per year. So in the area I'm in, it's about $4,800 a unit per year in expenses. And that's with taxes and insurance and everything before your debt. And that's a good number to kind of get a rule of thumb. But, obviously when you're in due diligence, you're going to break down every expense and look at it more detailed. But for quick analysis, you can kind of double check and make sure you're in the right area by using that type of number.
That makes sense. Is there anything that determines higher or lower on that, like type of heat? I guess if utilities are included, are those some factors that will have a property manager say, hey, it's 4,800 as long as these conditions are there? Or is it kind of 4,800 that they have quoted you for just, general range for expenses?
Yeah, so, depending on who pays for utilities. So typically, in this area, at least, everybody's, the owner is paying for the water and, a lot of times the heat. So that's kind of consistent here a lot. But, there's factors with who pays utilities that come into play. Even the area where you're at is going to have a huge difference on that, because taxes are going to vary. You're going to have colder climates, you're going to have the larger heat bills or snow plowing bills. The type of building can have a lot to do with if you have a lot of common areas that are heated, or if you have, where they're just like townhouse style.
Yep.
So yeah, there's a lot of things that can affect that. And that would be, the good question to ask the property manager that has similar units that can answer those specific to your area.
I love it. That's a great tip. Like you said, on the rent upside piece, apartments.com, I use them as well. Rentometer, I even go to Craigslist to get a sense of what listings are going for. A property manager could be your best friend. I know, I've networked with brokers, I've networked with bankers, but the property managers seem to be the ones that I get the most value out of as far as networking with them, because they cut through it all, and they know they know the brokers, they know the bankers, right? They know everybody, and they can give you such great information on how to analyze a property. And a lot of them own property. So you're talking to like-minded investors in many cases, which is awesome. For value add, you talked about, rent for the area, vacancy, CapEx, all of that stuff. Is there anything else that you can think of that people need to think about when they're considering, how am I going to get a value add out of this property?
Yeah, so you talk about the rent is the big one. Sometimes their expenses can be mismanaged, and you can go in there and fix that. But probably one of the biggest ones you see now is water savings. So if you have a building that hasn't been updated and they got leaky faucets and 10 gallon per flush toilets, and you pull that out, and it can significantly change a lot of the expenses quite a bit, especially when you're paying that water bill. So the water is a big one. You can do a lot of little things. If you have a really big one, I did a podcast, where you can get the cable company to pay you to come onto your property, and be the service provider. If you're in a market where you can, if it's deregulated for the utilities, you can shop those. So there's a lot of things you can do on the expense side as well.
That's a great point. And I think when you talk about value add in this market, especially because deals are hard to come by, they are. You look at a lot, you kiss a lot of frogs right before you find that prince. You have to be a bit creative, especially if you're going to be using other people's money in a syndication model. Somewhat creative in finding that value add opportunity. Do you want to take on pets? Is that an option? I walked a building where the manager was like, we do not have pets here. And as soon as he said that, a dog started barking in a unit. So what they're saying is we don't take money for pets here, but there are
Yes.
pets there. So there's value add in that, right? So things like that are where you have to get creative. Is there room to build or expand or convert space that's maybe not being used appropriately into units? I mean, there's so much stuff that you could possibly do. So
Yeah,
no,
that's
this is good.
well, I was gonna say that's a great point. I've seen other people do where they'll have like 3 of the units that have been converted into storage, because they don't want to drive to Lowe's to pick up, whatever. But I mean, if you're collecting 6, 7, 800 bucks a month for that unit, that's worth a couple trips to Home Depot or something. So
Absolutely. I saw one where a lady was the manager of the building, and they converted her unit or 2 units to 1 for her, and she paid no rent. So she managed the building. She was getting 2 units with no rent being paid. I mean, hey, a good property manager, a good on-site manager or maintenance person is great, but I mean, to give away a unit for that, there's value add in that, right? There's upside. You have to determine how much it is and how you price that and all of that. But you got to get creative. I think in this market, we've had to get creative to find anything that even remotely starts to work. But the stuff's out there if you can be. So this is great, man. You've dropped a ton of information as far as how to analyze. We talked about taxes, which I think people, have to realize that you have to do a level of analysis in your underwriting. We've talked about using software. Yeah, got to use software. I agree with you on that in order to analyze these deals. Otherwise, you're going to get potentially jammed up and pay the wrong price for a property. You talked about how to calculate expenses, how to, leveraging property managers is a great, great tip. Anything else any other parting words of wisdom before we wrap up?
I think that's it. I think that's a good place to start. So, I mean, if anybody had questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Where can people get in touch with you? That was going to be my last question for you.
Yeah, so my email is reed, REED, at Starkey Capital, STARKEY, capital, CAPITAL.com. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody about it. I'd love to see you at my meetup. That would be awesome.
I got to get there.
Love to talk to you there, but.
Yeah, same. I got to get you to mine. It's the kids, man. The kids do it to us, right? The back and forth. But I do got to get to your meetup because I think is it a barbecue place?
Yeah, they have great food.
Nothing else.
Well, I don't know. I had a salad there. I'm trying to eat healthy, so I've had a salad there. It was, this bowl. It's like this big, but yeah.
Salad with brisket on top.
Just chicken. Yeah, brisket's barbecue sauces. Trying to reduce my sugar a little bit, but.
Understood. Yeah. But we'll definitely get to each other's meetings. But yeah, look up Reed. He's doing some really, really cool stuff. Reed at starkeycapital.com, STARKEY capital.com. Hit him up. He's a great resource. I mean, we scratched the surface of the level of detail this guy can get into. I know of people that have gone to meet with him on a Saturday just to sit down and go through property analysis. He knows what he's talking about. So if you have questions, check him out. Check out his meetup in Monroe. And I really appreciate having you on today. And best of luck with everything you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jamie.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you.